The R3 just got announced this morning. Canon's, I'm going to call it Mirrorless Monster because it is their biggest hybrid. I'm going to call it their flagship hybrid. I know that's not what they're calling it, but I'm going to call it their flagship hybrid because that's what it is right now. Some super high level specs, 6K 60 RAW, 4K 120. It's got a flippy screen on there. It's got the same IBIS as the R5. Looks like a good camera for $6,000. What's your thoughts? What do you think? You're a Canon guy right now. You have a channel that focuses on content on other people's content and using gear as well. So you're a Canon guy. What do you think?
Man, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, I feel like every new camera release, especially when you get to this level, there's so many different things to talk about. And I think, first of all, this is really a photo camera, a really amazing photography camera.
It is.
And I think it's really geared towards high-end professionals doing photojournalism, sports, action, wildlife, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really geared towards the 1DX, because it's same body shape, ergonomics, big battery, crazy burst rates, insane autofocus, and also it has a 24 megapixel sensor. So it's really geared towards speed and that kind of thing for photography. Now, I think there's a lot of things to unpack, and one is the marketing. There's gonna be a lot of comparisons with the R5, of course, and then also with Sony cameras. We can get into all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But the marketing was very different. When the R5 was being leaked out and talked about, it was this monster of a high video camera. But this is it does some video, but it wasn't really, even if you look at the press release, it's one paragraph in there about video. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about it, is that, it does have some cool video stuff, but overall, it's a photo camera. But we can get more into the video stuff too.
I think people are going to be buying it for video as well, though. I think there's a lot of people out there who like that, myself included, that bigger style mirrorless body, who maybe had the C70 but now want some stills as well. Now, I know the C70 is still a much better video-centric camera, but if you want the best of both worlds and you're maybe not happy with the R5's performance in terms of overheating or that kind of thing, I think there's going to be a lot of draw for people for this camera. You not agree?
Yes and no. I mean, the R5 is an amazing photography camera. It's also 45 megapixel for those who want high resolution photos.
Yep.
Great autofocus, great IBIS. It's great for photography. I think the R5 C70 combo, if you can swing it and pay for two cameras like that, might be better in some situations. Also, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about expensive cameras here, man. I mean, if you can afford a $6,000 body, you probably can afford two cameras, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they're not cheap bodies by any means. If you're buying either of these, you obviously have some form of a need for it professionally, and you probably could afford both. Hey, thanks for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, I know throughout the whole video you've been wondering, where did he get that t-shirt? It's a nice color. It looks good on him. I'm sure his wife likes how that looks. And she does. You'd be very right in thinking that. Well, it's actually from Cuts. There's a discount code down below, and now you know you can get back to the video. Let's go over some of the specs just in a little bit more detail here. One thing that stood out to me is it's got this really crazy new eye autofocus that tracks with your eye, and I saw a video of it. CVP has a video, and it's like a little dot that appears in the EVF, and where you move your eye around, the autofocus point tracks to there. So you think it might be a gimmick, right?
I don't know. I mean, it's the first time it's come out, and there's times where
new,
camera companies or technology in general come out with something new, and people go, "Oh, this isn't." I mean, I know it's totally different, but the R with the scrolly thing, they thought that was cool, and everybody hated it.
It's true. It's true. I mean, they have to try things. To me, that sounds fantastic. It's the natural step to improve speed, really. If a computer can't, if a computer isn't focusing on what you want it to focus on, but your eye is, it's the natural progression to get autofocus better. So I'll be very interested to see when lots of people get their hands on it to see actually how it works.
Agreed. And I'd be curious to see about for video too.
Yeah, for video especially, just thinking about what you want to focus on instead of actually physically having to focus it. That could be a really big deal if it's useful, if it works. That's the key there.
Absolutely.
So you know a little bit about you've been doing a little bit more research on it than I have, the overheating. So the R5 obviously plagued with overheating issues when it first came out, which they have fixed a substantial amount of now. What does it look like for the R3 so far?
All right, so this is, I think, the big weakness for Canon with their mirrorless hybrid and talking about video in particular, they have yet to put out a camera that can do 4K video that doesn't overheat, isn't cropped, doesn't have line skipping. Okay?
Yep.
So the R had great 4K, but it was heavily cropped. The R5 and R6 have really great oversampled 4K, but they overheat in everything. The only way to get full frame 4K video in the R5 is either to use the line skip mode or to use the crop mode. Now, the crop mode is great because most people don't realize that on a high resolution camera, if you do it in crop mode, it's a 1-to-1 readout. So it's not like, or it's actually oversampled in the R5 even. It's like 5.1K or something. So you still get an unbelievable image, but they've yet to be able to do that. So the big thing which makes me most excited, not just about the R3, but future Canon mirrorless cameras, is that it'll do 6K oversampled to 4K in up to 60p, and it will not overheat in 24 or 30. And so to me, that's like a huge improvement that has not existed in Canon mirrorless cameras. But the funny thing is, if we're talking about a 24 megapixel camera that downsamples from 6K to 4K in 24 and 30p, you know what camera I'm thinking about? The Sony A7 III from 3 years ago, which was $2,000. So
it kind of shows you Canon has been playing catch up this whole time, but now maybe they're there. So hopefully this is the future of any cameras that they bring out. Like I said to you earlier, this is essentially what the R5 should have been, right?
In a lot of ways,
like some of this tech should have been in the R5, like ready to go when it came out. But obviously the R5 had a lot of issues. So yeah, it's very interesting to see what Canon's going to put out. And I know that there's potentially another camera coming, next year they said, early 2022?
Yeah, we'll see about that. I think the big thing with Canon hybrid cameras is that they are very focused on photography, and a lot of people want them to be more video focused. But when you start putting high megapixel sensors in there, you have to figure out a way to get it into a 4K image without overheating. And so that's why the A7S III and FX3 were just magic, because it's a 12 megapixel sensor. It's a 1-to-1 readout. It's like there's no issue. It's fast. It's quick. There's not much processing. But for them to have these photo capabilities, that's where you have this issue with Canon trying to put out a 4K video. And so again, like not overheating in 24 and 30p, like that's a huge improvement.
Yeah. Basically, before you, like, to dumb it down, before you couldn't really have it all, and now you can have it all.
For $6,000.
Right? For $6,000, yeah. So a healthy amount of money.
Another thing I want to...
What else we got in there?
Yeah, no record limits. So
no record limits, yeah.
Yeah, so the 30-minute Canon thing is gone, and I just hope that along with the no overheating oversample gets pushed to future cameras, and I think that's why I'm most excited about seeing the video specs in this camera.
Do you think that it will actually perform as they say that they do? Because I know notoriously in the past Canon has said X and it's always been Y, or like there's always been a disconnect between what they say the specs are and what actually get in terms of performance. So we won't really know until people have it in their hands testing it thoroughly. But what do you think? You think it will?
From what I've seen, it looks like it will. They say that you can do 6 hours in 24 and 30p. So, and from the few videos I've seen, people seem to be getting that. So the other thing about the R5 is, like, they didn't talk about it in the marketing, but like in their technical specs, it did have overheating numbers in there, like early, like people just, I don't know, didn't see it or it wasn't in the marketing.
Scanned over it.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think they will be able to do it. I think they've also hopefully learned their lesson after the R5 and like overpromising.
I hope so. I really do hope so. Like, although I'm not a Canon user like I used to be, and yeah, I don't want to see them fail. Like, I would love to see competition only means good things for other companies. Like, people always think about that as like, oh, well, Canon's got the best camera now. Well, that's great for Sony, because that means Sony now has to step their level up. They have to put in more tech and start getting more innovative to start doing other things. So, I mean, what do you think this means? If any, does it mean anything for Sony now?
Yeah, I think anytime that something comes out with a new camera, I think it shakes up the market a little bit, especially one that's so powerful like this one. I think there's a lot of question marks with Sony, but yeah, let's talk about...
What do you think is the direct competitor for this camera in Sony's world?
The A1, of course. I mean, you're talking for photography, it's, fast frame rates in terms of photography, high resolution. I mean, the A1 is their flagship camera. It's also different. It's 50 megapixels. So it's very different than 24. So I think that's the competitor in terms of Sony.
What's the A1 priced at? A1
$6,500.
So 65. So it's right in the same ballpark, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it does make sense. Makes a lot of sense. Other things that stood out to me, it's got the nice little screen on the top there, like the R had. Has a flippy screen. So although this is considered like the mirrorless 1DX, the 1DX didn't have a flip screen, right? It was always just fixed.
Right, and so A1 doesn't either.
A1 doesn't either. No, it just has the
flip up,
very tilt screen thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a solid little camera. I mean, I say little, it's not. It's huge. It's a massive camera. It's a solid, expensive camera that's also very large.
Yeah, I think it's going to do really well. I mean, I don't know if anyone's actually going to be able to get one of these. I mean, I don't know how many they produced, how many they can be able to get out in terms of production and chip shortages and things like that. So we'll see about that.
The chip shortage is still everywhere. So, I mean, they announced earlier in the year that they're starting production of it, and then this was basically another version of that, right? Just, we are still continuing production, and now a few people have it to test out. So I don't think there was a date put out, though. You can pre-order it, but there's no date, right?
Yeah, correct. Can we talk a little bit more about the mirrorless versus cinema camera situation with Canon?
Yeah, let's.
That's always, I think, interesting because there's always been this divide with Canon. Like, if you want this for video, you have to get a cinema camera.
Have to get that.
You have to. You have to get a C200, you have to get a C300, C100, whatever, or C70 now. And I think that line is getting a little bit closer, but they're still leaving that line, drawing that line in the sand. Because my biggest thing with video, one of my biggest things, obviously frame rates and codecs and all that stuff, but dynamic range is pretty much the main thing for me, is dynamic range. And so there's no C-Log 2 in this camera.
Right.
There's C-Log 3, which is in the R5 and the R6, but no C-Log 2. And if you guys watch this don't know, C-Log 2 has more dynamic range than C-Log 3. So I think
that's the one to use.
That's the one to use, yeah. You're going to get a couple extra stops at dynamic range. So I think that's the big dividing line. They're not going to give you everything. And so when you start looking at images out of the R3 or the R5, like, they're going to be beautiful in terms of colors and, sharpness, especially with the oversampled. But dynamic range is not going to be as high as Canon cinema camera or an FX3, because they're going to have more dynamic range. So to me, that's a big limiting factor.
It is. It's always funny how Canon always does this every year. They just don't want to, and I understand that they don't want to cripple their cinema market. But if they were to put C-Log 2 in there, do you really think cinematographers would be now buying this opposed to like the C70? Because I don't think they would. Like, I genuinely think people would still buy a more video-centric camera. Like, this doesn't have, ergonomically, it's not as easy to use for video as the C70 would be. So I don't know why they just consistently just cripple things by not including one little feature like that. That just stops people from even looking at it because of that reason.
Yeah, I think if you're a hardcore cinematographer, like, you want things like time code, you want ND filters, you want XLR inputs, and that's not those high-end professional features is what you're looking for in a cinema camera. Yeah. But man, like, really,
you don't get any of that on this.
Yeah, no, not at all. But like, if you have a really powerful hybrid camera, like, that appeals to a wider market. And I think there's a lot of creators and professional videographers too that, are basically shooting on mirrorless hybrid cameras now because they're pretty close and they can carry around one camera, and that's helpful for sure. Agreed.
So they also put out a couple of other lenses as well, some new RF lenses, which is interesting because Canon is bringing out lower priced RF lenses. Typically they're pretty pricey. Like, if you want something, one of the L lenses, you're spending like $2,000 to $3,000 easily. But they've brought out a compact 16mm, right? Was it $299?
Yeah, $299, and also an inexpensive 100 to 400 variable aperture zoom. And it's interesting, and I think that nothing interesting specifically about these two lenses, but overall the RF lineup is evolving. And when it first came out, there were, the R and the RP, which everyone was like, oh, they're not professional bodies, but they came out with like really expensive glass, like all the 2.8 zooms, the 50-1.2, the 85, like really, really nice lenses, very expensive. But then now we have these really nice bodies and, the expensive lenses, but they're rolling out this sort of more budget-friendly options, like the 16 2.8, which is $300, the 35 1.8, which is $500 lens, but also has image stabilization. The 51,
beautiful. I love that lens.
Yeah, the 50 1.8, the 85 f2, and now they have a couple of zooms. They don't have like a wide cheap zoom yet, but I think the fact that we're seeing this part of the lens lineup being evolved is really paving the way for some cheaper full frame cameras, and I think that's
Agreed.
another thing I'm super excited to see, and I'm hoping that comes out next year.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll see early 2022, because it says it's going to be a Canon camera that doesn't satisfy the fanboys, is what someone put, right? So that probably means not very spec heavy, but also something to potentially compete with, maybe like, I don't know, maybe the A7 IV if it's well priced. Like, who knows? Like, it's hard to say. We'll have to wait and see. But it's exciting because it shows now that they have the tech to pull off a good camera. So if they have it, they can potentially put it into other things. And whether they do or not, we'll see.
Yeah, and it'll get cheaper over time too. I mean, right now it's in their $6,000 camera, but maybe next year we'll see one in a $3,000 camera or a $2,500 camera. I think the other thing, which I was just talking about, was the inexpensive entry-level full frame. I mean, a lot of people overlook the RP, but that was under $1,000 for a full frame mirrorless camera. Like, Sony doesn't have that.
No, they don't. Nothing like that. Not
Nothing
full
like
frame
that.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'm talking full frame. Yeah, for sure. So I think if they can, come out with something under $2,000, for example, that's full frame, that shoots 4K video, like that would be huge for the market. I think there's a huge barrier to get into it right now. You need at least $2,000 to get one of those kinds of cameras.
Yeah, there's a big gap that's waiting to be filled, and if they can be the first people to do that, that's good for them.
It's going to put some pressure on Sony as well, because if they come out with the A7 IV, which is rumored to be, people are expecting it to be $2,000 to $2,500. I think that's what I've been hearing. There aren't those like entry level cameras. So I'm excited to see that in particular. Also, like the 16 2.8 that's an interesting lens. Like that's a cool, like compact, like could be like a filming yourself kind of lens.
That's a 16 is such a great lens for so many different things. Like it's a great landscape lens, architecture lens. If you're a real estate photographer or videographer, like that's a perfect lens for the f2.8. It's not too bad in low light. It's a great vlogging lens. Like that's a really smart lens to put out, because there's a lot of people that will want something like that. And previously, all you could get will be the 1535, which is how much?
Huge. It's $2,400, and it's a massive lens.
Yeah, it's almost 10 times the price. So it's a smart lens to put out on Canon's behalf.
Yeah, I'm thinking a gimbal lens too. Like,
oh yeah,
very lightweight.
Exactly. Fly it on a pocket-friendly gimbal, or a packable gimbal. Like, yeah, good choice from Canon there.
Yeah, Canon's always been good, I think, in the past with like the EF lineup. Obviously, that was developed over decades, but there was always like several tiers. There was like the super budget, then there was kind of like a mid-grade, and then the L versions. And even in the L, there's like the F4s and the 2.8s. And I don't know, it's good to see them sort of filling that in now and not just going after the high-end market. And so it was interesting. I also think it was an interesting release for them to release their like high-end camera with some, more budget-friendly lenses at the same time. That's kind of an interesting combination.
It is. They're doing things in a really strange order, but they obviously have a roadmap of why it's being done this way, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens down the road.
Absolutely. And so I know you do a lot of Sony content on your channel, and obviously, so how do you feel that this is going to shake up Sony at all? I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that like these cameras are planned so far ahead of time. It's not like, the R3's out and then like Sony's going to do this. Like,
yeah, it's true actually. Yeah, I mean, these things are planned out like years in advance. This has probably been planned out for at least 2 or 3 years. So when someone comes out with another camera, like if Sony comes out with a camera next month and it beats this, they'll be like, oh, well, that was their response. It's like, well, realistically, no. Like they've had that planned for years as well. What do I think does this mean for Sony right now? I don't know. I don't think right now anything. I think it more depends on what they can put in something like the A7 IV. Can they get in... I still kind of think that they're going to put in like 6K or 8K or something like that. It's going to have a crazy high frame rate for photos as well. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting time. I like seeing all these new cameras come out, because it's almost like the beginning of an award season for movies. Like, here's this camera that's coming out. Oh, what have we got next? And like we just start comparing them. And we're such big gearheads. We just love to talk about things that, like, I'm never going to buy this, but it's interesting to talk about.
Yeah, not going to buy the R3. But I think the A7 IV is going to be, in some ways, a strong answer to this, because if you look at the A7 III, it's a 6K oversampled to 4K image.
Yeah.
So I assume they're going to probably stay within that sort of framework with the A7 IV, and we're going to see 6K, 7K, 8K, whatever, oversampled to 4K, but it's not going to be $6,000. And
it's not going to be $6,000. No. When the A7 III came out, the reason it did so well is because it packed in so much stuff for a price that was never seen before, and that's why it was so hard to get hold of for months and months. And I think that's why Sony has been waiting so long, because they're looking to do something very similar again. So if they can get in like 2/3 of the tech that this camera has in and bring it out for even half the price at $3,000, which is more than what the A7 III would have been, then that's a great response.
I agree. And the A7 III held up for years, and they never lowered.
Still does.
I know, and they pretty much never lowered the price. I mean, I think it was a few $100s off now, but that's 3 years later.
Yeah. They actually lowered the price substantially on the A7 II and tried to like pitch the A7 II as a great bargain version to the A7 III, but it's like completely different tech, like a years apart. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what it has to offer. And allegedly Sony has Sony does have a press conference next month in 3 weeks, I think. So is that the A7 IV? People were saying October, potentially. It could be. There's a lot of people think that's another cinema camera as well. Maybe it's a response to something like this. I'd love to see Sony come out with something a bit smaller than the FX6, but a bit bigger than the FX3, but also a hybrid. Be very interesting.
You're asking for a pretty weird
I'm
camera,
not asking
Chris.
a lot.
Yeah, not asking a lot.
I want to fill a void that doesn't exist.
It's awesome. I can't wait to see all this stuff coming out, and I just think it's not like this camera in particular that's getting me excited. It's the tech that's coming out that's available and it's working, and just like to see Canon moving forwards with some of this stuff. So I'm excited about it.
Agreed. And Josh, where can people find you? Because you obviously have you have a couple of channels. You have a farming channel, completely irrelevant to cameras, and but it shows like the content on there is obviously of a very high quality because you love cameras so much. But you also have your content on content channel. So where can people find you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. If you want to see my actual camera work, go to my farming channel. It's just my name, Josh Satin, and then content on content. Hopefully you can leave a link in somewhere in the video, but we've been doing some discussion videos like with you and some other creators, and also stuff that I'm interested in. You know, right now I own a Canon C70 and an R5. And so that's what I'm shooting with. So, content around that stuff as well. So yeah, that's where you guys can find me.
Yeah, go check out Josh's channels. I'll put the links below, and he's extremely knowledgeable, definitely more knowledgeable than me. He goes in deep with his stuff, so definitely worth a watch. Thanks for coming by today, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Chris.